Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. We are the Hologrumps. I'm Liam.
And I'm Colum.
And we're here today to talk to you about Star Trek Picard. But before we do, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you like what you see on the channel, because we're sure to have lots of great content for you in the coming days. So, we're going to be talking about interviews that Patrick Stewart has given regarding Star Trek Picard. We're also going to talk about previous interviews with other members of the production team. And the reason we're doing this is because we have a number of issues with CBS Star Trek, and we're just going to lay our cards out on the table so everyone knows where we stand going into Star Trek Picard.
We're not going to be taking any articles from any CBS-owned sites. Any CBS-owned media, such as CBS Interactive, CNET, GameSpot, Metacritic, Watch Magazine, comicbook.com.
When Patrick Stewart first and initially announced that he was returning to the role of Jean-Luc Picard, he came out on stage at Star Trek Celebration. He first announced that when he was rejecting reprising the role of Captain Picard, it was for a number of reasons. He wanted to distance himself from the character of Jean-Luc Picard because of an interaction he had with a director who said, "I don't want to cast Captain Picard in my show." He said that he changed his mind after watching some TNG episodes, including ones that he hadn't seen before. But he is directly quoted as saying, and this is regarding a police detective who contacted him and really moved him. The police detective said, "I love my job. But there are days when I go home, and what I have seen, what I have experienced, the cruelty, the barbarity, the viciousness, the nastiness of what I've experienced, makes me despair for the future of our society and the world. But when I feel like that, I go to my video shelf and I take down Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I know we're going to have a future." The detective story that Patrick Stewart told us about is in relation to people's view of Star Trek and its world as a view and an outlook on the future as being a much more optimistic and better world than we live in now.
But it's actually from the article in Decider in January 12th, where we started to see where Stewart really didn't want to go back to this role. He had no desire to be a part of this. Reports that Patrick Stewart didn't even want to have the original cast members involved in the production. He wanted to distance himself from The Next Generation. However, as an executive producer with creative control, he gradually felt that they should be involved. And he's actually quoted as saying, "I don't mean to give any offense to anyone, but I struggle with this issue. I was so obsessed with this idea that we must leave Next Generation behind. We must pull the curtain down on that. Luckily, as a co-executive producer, I was involved in meetings I'd never been involved in as an actor before. I could contribute. I began increasingly to feel my colleagues from Next Generation, we needed to see them. They too can reflect how times have changed." Now, it's becoming clear from these statements that Stewart is creating a show for his own interests as an actor and not for the franchise itself, which he has worked to distance himself from.
Yeah, because it becomes evidence that the work that he produces is always work that he stars in himself, and he doesn't actually have all that many production credits, particularly as a creative. So he has 7 here, I believe, on the list from IMDB, and there's only one of them here that is of the genre, which was Star Trek Insurrection in 1998. And of course that was kind of a mixed bag, that particular film.
In a very recent interview, Stewart has gone on to allude to the fact that he wants to play a very similar character to one he's already played before. He alludes to this idea of destroying the normality of Star Trek. It's in a Variety interview. The article goes on to say it wasn't until his last X-Men exploit in 2017 with Hugh Jackman in Logan that he imagined a return to Picard could be desirable. He's quoted as saying, "Hugh and I were so thrilled when the last thing we did for X-Men was Logan. It was the best X-Men experience we both had because we were both the same characters, but their worlds had been blown apart." It's quite funny that Logan gave Stewart the idea to destroy the universe just to show that Picard could have something to react to. Logan was an entirely different franchise. Stewart, in my opinion, wants to relive an enjoyable acting experience with the same situations occurring to different characters.
Capture lightning in a bottle twice, so to speak. That he saw Logan get his exit, and now he wants to do the same with Jean-Luc Picard. Now, he also says that the show, of course, is going to be very different from its predecessor in texture, tone, format, production value, and even the likelihood of characters dropping an F-bomb. That is all by design, Stewart's design. Now, this is a darker Trek, moving away from his initial quote, particularly about the detective, talking about how it's going to be a brighter future.
Now, The Next Generation presented a humanist future in which issues like poverty, race, and class have been long sorted out, and conflicts are more often resolved through negotiation and problem solving than at the point of a phaser pistol. This is what the article says, and this is idealistic, yes, but it gave us a world to aspire to. Despite idealism, there were still problems to be solved peacefully. We expect Star Trek to be a better future. He goes on to say, I think what we're trying to say is important. The world of Next Generation doesn't exist anymore. It's different. Nothing is safe. Nothing's really secure.
And why doesn't it exist? I mean, how has Brexit and Trump impacted the world of Star Trek so much that it has to become so dated to have characters like Lorca quoting Trump almost, saying, "Make the Empire glorious again"? I mean, what meaning does this have for Star Trek moving forward 15, 20 years from now? All it does is date the show as this quaint thing from that period when the producers were trying to signal their hatred for Donald Trump. Now, Patrick Stewart does go on to say that Roddenberry believed that in the future human beings would advance to the point that they would essentially not have conflict with one another. Stewart, also an executive producer, insists, "We are remaining very faithful to Gene Roddenberry's notion of what the future might be like, but rigid adherence to that notion is clearly not what he's here for." He says, in the world of Next Generation, it had been far too perfect and protected. It was a safe world of respect and communication and care, and sometimes fun. In Picard, the Federation, a union of planets bonded by shared democratic values, has taken an isolationist turn. The new show, Stewart says, was me responding to the world of Brexit and Trump. Remember that? And feeling, why hasn't the Federation changed? Why hasn't Starfleet changed? Maybe they're not as reliable and trustworthy as we all thought.
Saying why hasn't Starfleet changed is quite offensive, considering you are the one actively changing it to be more sinister and flawed. The Starfleet we grew up with was a paragon of the future. It didn't need to change because it's just a story. Starfleet has always been there to be the moral center of the galaxy it exists in. We expect that. Subversion of that idea because of personal political views is inherently wrong.
Yeah, and in Decider, you have stated this is not a political show, but the show is inherently grounded in politics, contemporary politics, and this is shifting at a rapid pace. By the time the show airs, we could be in a totally different political climate. To promote longevity of a show, we should be dealing with more societal issues that have been prevalent throughout all of time, and not just who's the current president of the United States, because that'll change in 5 years. 8 years from now, we'll have another Republican. Another 8 years from then, it'll be another Democrat, and so on and so on, and this current iteration of Star Trek will just be dated.
In my personal opinion, Stewart is doing this because he's fed up with the character. Stewart is fed up with being associated with the character as Picard is now. He's tired of playing the same role over 3 decades, and he wants to change things up for himself. The only reason he's back is because he doesn't have to play the Picard we know and love. This is all personal ego blinding Stewart from the fact that the fans, they want what they know, not this Jacques Picard.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. The fans want this. This show should be about the inclusion of the fans. And then Alex Kurtzman, in a recent New York Times article, goes on to say, if inclusivity is already a central doctrine of the franchise, Trek is perfectly poised to represent everybody in a very profound way. If we have this platform, let's double down on this. But this show is not a central show. It openly rejects half of the UK and US population, and it's making a show targeting all of them as racist and homophobic. So much so that the STD executive producer referred to Season 1 Klingons in a Rolling Stones magazine interview as secret Trump supporters, saying that the show's villains are specifically patterned after the Trumpster credo of "Make America Great Again." So, when I was in university, we covered something called the Liz Lerman critical response process, which is basically approaching critical circumstances by imparting positive criticism first, because the whole idea is that if you just go straight in with negative criticism, all you're going to do is make the other person shut down. And current Star Trek could definitely learn a lot from this when they're trying to make a point.
You see, STD takes the approach of trying to change the viewpoint of others by humiliating them and degrading them in an almost sadistic fantasy, avenging all the wrongs that have befallen them in their personal lives and providing no meaningful feedback.
Like if we look at Aaron Herbert's referring to all of the Klingons, the grotesque villains, as Trump supporters, or even taking a look at in Season 2, Episode 1, we have the white mansplainer as fodder to be humiliated and blown up. How in any way is this intended to educate and change people's viewpoints? If you have first alienated them from watching the show to begin with, by making it clear they are not welcome.
Contrast this to the Next Generation's Captain Jellicoe in Chain of Command Parts 1 and 2. Jellicoe didn't get on with the crew. He spoke down to members of the crew, but throughout the episode learned to grow and trust others through a positive guidance from Counselor Troy. He was put in the position of commanding a ship full of people he didn't know. Now, while not growing to like Riker, he understood his value to the ship and trusted the success of the mission to him. In the end, both Jellicoe and Riker succeeded, showing us that we may not always agree, but we can still work together for a meaningful, greater good.
And the fact of the matter is, Kurtzman Trek isn't made for a greater good. If we've learned anything from the recent series and Stewart's interviews, it's that Picard is set to be a personal statement from Stewart on his desire to try something new with an established franchise, and a political statement from the writers, directors, and network. And this is what we have going into current Star Trek. So, Colin, how are you feeling for Star Trek Picard?
I'm hopeful but pessimistic. If there's anything that can be gleaned from these articles that we've shown you here today, it's that the future of Star Trek is going to be mired in the politics of the next 4 years.
Yeah, they've made it abundantly clear. And if we look at the interviews on the red carpet, for instance, of Star Trek Picard, we were looking at, for instance, Patrick Stewart and Jason Isaacs, Lorca, for instance, and all he did for his entire interview on the red carpet was talk about how Star Trek is relating to current politics and how they're trying to make people better.
Which is not what Star Trek is about. Of course, Star Trek is about making people better. But like we said in this video, it's not about insulting people to the point where they give up on their own opinions just to join you because they're so fed up with listening to you. It's about encouraging people and hoping for a better future. Not assuming that the future is going to be drab, bleak, miserable, monochrome, where everyone could betray you.
We've already have dark Star Trek in the form of Star Trek Discovery. The first captain that turned out to be some kind of space racist, evil supervillain, and then we have Philippa Georgiou that they seem to love and are going to make a show about, but she was introduced eating Kelpian. I could never get behind a character like that. I don't expect how these producers ever expect us to see her head her own show and go on some kind of redemption arc when she's seen essentially cannibalizing one of our main characters.
I think we've talked enough, Liam. I think we'll close it up there.
So, if you liked what you saw here and you hope to see more, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button because we will be sure to be covering Star Trek Picard as each episode comes out each week. So, for the Hologrumps, I've been Liam.
And I'm Colm.
Take care.